What's up, football fans? My name is Black Tiger Talks, and I'm here to talk Titans. Now, the Tennessee Titans have made a massive mistake, and that mistake was made on August 26th when we decided to trade Malik Willis to the Packers for a seventh round pick. Now, that decision was a terrible decision now. We can all see that wasn't a great decision to make now. But even at the time, it was a very bad decision to make. Now, the reason why is kind of a little convoluted, but not too convoluted. The thing is, you had to compare the prospects that we had, right? Malik Willis versus Will Levis. Which quarterback was better for the team? You see, the decision to trade Malik was made as a sign, as a signal. It was a sign to everyone else, a clear message to everyone else, both on the team and outside the team, that Will Levis is our guy. We're putting all our eggs in the Will Levis basket, and he's going to take us wherever he's going to take us. At the time, they hoped the playoffs or the Super Bowl. We all know now it's QB purgatory. But that was what it was for because Malik was starting to play pretty well in preseason and in practice. There were beat writers out there that were saying Malik looks better than Levis does at practice. Levis was showing all the same signs that he's showing right now. And if the beat writers were seeing it, you know the coaches were seeing it, you know the GM was seeing it, and you know the players were seeing it. Some of the players were probably knew in their hearts just by looking at it that Malik is a better quarterback than Levis, but we're going to go with Levis. That was the decision that was made by the GM Ryan Carthon and the head coach Brian Callahan. So that was bad enough on its own that the coach and the GM decided to go with a guy who was very clearly not as good as their quarterback, as their franchise guy. But again, some people would argue that at the time, it was a better bet to make. And that simply is not true. You see, when they were first drafted, both Malik and Levis, Malik was the better prospect when they were drafted, period. Now let's break that down and see why that is. You see, both Malik and Levis were project QBs. Now, being a project QB basically means you don't have all the great intangibles. You see, a backup QB is supposed to have all the great intangibles. Starter QB is supposed to have the intangibles and the athleticism, the physical tools to be great. So the intangibles would be things like leadership, would be things like reading a defense, it would be things like, being able to make good decisions, not throw the ball away or, protect the ball. Don't make bad decisions. Don't play hero ball. Those types of things is what a good backup is supposed to do and what a good starter is supposed to do. But on top of that, you want to have, as a starter, those top tier traits. You know what I mean? You want to have that pocket presence. You want to have that ability to manipulate the pocket and find these angles and areas where you can throw the ball. Find that extra little bit of elbow room. You want to have the ability to, break, sacks, break tackles and whatnot, and get out of bad situations to make something out of nothing. You want to have that big arm that can throw the ball all the way down the field. You want to have the ability to layer it in, over the linebacker, but ahead of the safety. You want to have all these different physical tools as a starter. Now, the thing is, not every quarterback has all the tools, but they're supposed to have some amount of the tools, physical tools, and then some amount of the intangible, mental tools to make it, make themselves a great quarterback. The best quarterbacks in the league, people like Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, I'm forgetting his name now, but Josh Allen, Jordan Love, as he's getting up there, these are guys who had all the physical tools when they first came out, and then got a great deal of the mental tools later on. So, and other guys like Jared Goff are guys who have the mental tools. Geno Smith, you know what I mean? They have the mental tools already there. Some of these best quarterback guys like Joe Flacco, who currently now, thanks to age, is not as physically impressive as he was back in the day, but he still has a mental ability up there, and he's able to play the game at a high, not a high level, but he's not able to throw away the game. So the problem is that both Malik and Levis were both meant to be quarterbacks who didn't have those high level mental abilities. They didn't have the intangibles that you love to have. Now they had the leadership thing from what I've heard. I don't know the guys, but they had the leadership thing based on what everyone was saying. But they didn't have the ability to read defenses, to do the protections, to do all those types of major things, to make great decisions, actually. Both of them were known for playing hero ball in the opposite ways. Malik was known to play hero ball by holding on to the ball and not throwing it away sometimes. He would throw it away, but he wouldn't throw it into coverage if he wasn't certain that the guy was open. He really wanted to protect the ball, and he wanted to run himself sometimes and rely on his own legs rather than his arm, which was very frustrating to watch at times because you were like, hey, bro, just throw the ball away or just, throw the ball even if you don't see it. You got to trust your receivers. While Levis is the opposite. He trusts his arm so much, he'll throw it into situations that he never should have done, which is what got him in this place we're currently in. The fact that he just keeps on just throwing the ball into crazy situations, but he keeps on doing that. So those were the issues that they had when it comes to that ability, that intangible abilities, right? But they had a bigger issue when it came to their physical abilities. That's where they were not an issue, I should say. That was where they had their strengths, what made them a project, what made them interesting to look at, to think about where they could develop. And when it comes to that, that's where you have your ceiling, right? Your physical abilities determine where your ceiling is at. That's why if your mental abilities can grow, your intangibles can grow, but your physical abilities, they usually only get worse. You know what I mean? They don't typically tend to grow astronomically from where they are currently when you get drafted. So the ceiling for Malik was simply higher than Levis. Levis, his strengths were very simple. He had a pretty big arm, not an amazingly huge arm, but a pretty upper tier arm on him, right? He could throw the ball anywhere on the field, so he had great arm talent, and he had a great release. His release was really good. It was quick, it was snappy, it got the ball out. It was very great release, probably a top tier release. I'd say top 10, top 5, maybe even top 3 release in the league currently as far as how good his release is. It was incredible. So those were his abilities, His accuracy wasn't incredible, but those abilities alone were interesting to look at and see. He wasn't too small, wasn't too big either. He was just, pretty average as far as size-wise. He had his weight, as far as his thickness and his weight. Those were pretty good, of course. So ultimately speaking, he was a interesting prospect to use. But he lacked 2 abilities that are very important, though, or rather 3 abilities, which were he lacked pocket presence. He couldn't tell when someone was, rushing at him. He couldn't feel that pressure coming and step up in the pocket. He didn't have that time clock in his head, even to say, oh, wait, I've been in the pocket too long and I got to move. He didn't have that. He doesn't have them even now after playing all these games. So that's 2 things already against him. He can't, manipulate the pocket at all. That's just not what he can do. That's something you either have or you don't. He doesn't have it. And third, he can't break tackles. I mean, he can break the odd tackle every now and then, but as far as consistently making dudes miss, that's just not something he can do. He can't run over people. He can't juke them out in the open field, the backfield, or in the pocket. He just can't do it. So those were all red flags, especially in this day and age when you got these pass rushers like Micah Parsons and, Myles Garrett and TJ Watt and Nick Bosa, the Bosa brothers, all these guys coming after you, Max Crosby, that's the kicker, Max Crosby coming after you. You got these guys just who are so good, you got to be able to either manipulate the pocket, feel them coming and get the ball out of there, or You got to be able to break the tackle. That is what it is. So Malik excelled in all three of those places, all four, I suppose. He was really good at manipulating the pocket. He was great, elite at breaking tackles, and he had really good pocket presence. On top of being able to throw the ball really well, he had a big time arm, just as good as Levis's, if not better. He had the ability to do all the different arm angles to get the ball out, and so he was elite at that. Great arm talent. His release was not incredible. It was good, but it wasn't, great or anything like that. It was average probably, so nowhere near as good as Levis. Levis had a much better release. But that was where they at when they first came into the league. Now, after being in the league for a couple of years and actually looking at the games they had, we saw Malik was starting to improve in several areas, those areas that we didn't like about it. Now, his first couple of games were rough, but you have to compare them to Levis's first couple of games, right? Because those are the quarterbacks that you have. So Levis, in his games, he had guys that he was throwing to, like DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd. Those are great guys to throw to, at least in comparison to most teams. That, when the season started, we were talking about how that's one of the best receiving corps in the league, like top 10 receiving corps. That's what we were talking about when the season began. Let's not get it twisted. That's a pretty great receiving corps. His running backs he's played with were guys like Tony Pollard, who's had a really good season. Some of the best, yards after contact of anyone this season. He's a really good running back. And before that, he had Derrick Henry, the king. So he's had good running back play. Now, his line isn't incredible. In fact, it's pretty subpar, but it's not horrific. He had guys to begin the season out like Lloyd Cushenberry, a pretty solid center. He had, guards, that were pretty solid, and Peter Skoronsky and I forget the right tackle. It was Dylan Raditz, I think, who's pretty solid. Not great, not terrible, just solid at best. A little below par, honestly, low subpar. And then Nicholas Petit-Frere has been playing terrible, so he had a really bad right tackle and another solid to subpar left tackle in J.C. Latham. And that's his squad, basically. Now, Malik, in comparison, let's start at the line first, I guess, just because we just left off there. He didn't have J.C. Latham on the left. He had Dennis Daly in his game. Dennis Daly, who was a horrific tackle, historically bad tackle. That's who he had at left tackle. At right tackle, he had Nicholas Petit-Frere. So that's already worse. Dylan Raditz, I think, was at his right guard situation, so similarly bad. He didn't have Peter Skoronsky at any period of time. He had guys like Aaron Brewer in there. He had a much worse offensive line, all things put together. But then maybe you say he had a similar running back. He had Derrick Henry for a couple of his games. That's fair. But he also had a terrible receiving corps. His receiving corps were guys like Chris Coonley. That's right. Chris Coonley was the guy he was throwing to. Cody Hollister. A lot of you guys who aren't Titans fans don't even recognize these names because these guys have like 5 yards of receiving yards in their entire career. That's who we had around him. His best receiver was a guy by the name of Nick Westbrook-Akina, who you guys know because he is the 4th best receiver on Levis' squad right now. So yeah, Malik had no help. His help was horrific for him. So when you actually look at the course of the season, you start to see how Malik has a shot of getting better, right? He had terrible help to begin with, a terrible situation, but he at least has better talent than Levis did. And to go with it, you see now in practice, he's starting to really do well. In the preseason, he's starting to really do well. He's starting to figure out that I can't just hold the ball here and wait. I got to let it loose. And he's starting to really get that done. He's starting to read defenses better. The whole game's starting to slow down for him, it seems. He's really getting better. He hasn't had that much of a shot. So when you look at it like that, you realize that Malik was probably the better, not just the better prospect, but at that time, the better person to go with because Levis was throwing interceptions. Levis was, very aggressive with the ball, playing versus all right secondary. You got to remember that even at that time in the secondary that we had, people like our two top corners.